And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Rip Rapson, President of the Kresge Foundation.
Thank you all for your patience. As you can imagine, trying to schedule a mayor of a major American city in anything within sort of a 2-hour time block is a challenge, and one I'm not sure we've yet overcome. But we'll see. We keep getting these sort of creeping estimated time of arrivals. It's now 5:20, so if you guys don't mind sitting for a while, we'll be good. But it's just been a huge pleasure and privilege to sit in the back and listen to the sort of the extraordinary conversations that have gone on over the last, I've only been here today, but talking to participants over the last couple of days. It sounds like the site visits were extraordinary, the dancing was remarkable, and everything else sort of fell in place in ways that I hope gave you all a sense that you've had enough time to get to know your colleagues and to compare some ideas and some thoughts and even maybe plant some seeds for future collaboration. So thanks for taking the time. Mary Nutter, I mean, to be less flip, Mary Nutter does hope to be here sometime in the next 10-15 minutes, but we thought rather than staying quiet too long, we would get the conversation going. And I think let me just say a couple of things. First is that it's awfully hard, given the richness of the conversation that's just gone on, to be summative. And that's a lot to put on Aviva and on Laura. But I think we're going to try at least to sound some themes that I think I've heard, and a lot of you have mentioned to me in side conversations about the integration of systems, the complexity of long-term enduring change, relationships with public sector. I mean, I think we're going to try to touch on all of those things. And we thought it would be useful to unpack and ground this in an ecology of a particular place. A place where there's visionary, principled, and highly effective public sector leadership that is really helping to reimagine and transform a great post-industrial city. A place where the philanthropic sector has been really unafraid to take risks and to become fully engaged in their community's trajectory. Am I losing my sound? I think I am losing my sound. No? We're good? Okay, good. And in arts and culture, nonprofit sector, working at the serrated edge of really complicated civic engagement, neighborhood identity, and civic renewal. And that's why today we're going to talk about Detroit.
We're ready.
This is not the group I thought. Oh, I guess not. So let's talk instead about Philadelphia, which actually does have every one of those qualities I just mentioned. Those of you who want to talk about Detroit, I'm happy to stay late. But Mayor Nutter, as you'll see in a couple of minutes, is one of the finest elected officials in America right now. And Laura was saying that he's even more interesting now because he's sort of unfettered by the need to run for re-election. So no holds barred in a couple of minutes. But his administration has propelled progress in virtually every dimension of city life. We're really privileged and honored to hopefully get him to join us. Laura Sparks, as the head of the William Penn Foundation, is someone I have admired for a long time. Even though she's only been there, as the head, only a year?
Less than a year.
Less than a year. Mm-hmm. It seems like this was a job that was made for her and she for it. William Penn has been characterized, it seems to me, by really bold, thoughtful approaches to trying to sort of build the bedrock conditions of success for a place as complicated as Philadelphia is. And it's become a real pillar of any sort of problem-solving set that the community will put together. And Aviva, I think many of you have already met. For those of you who had the privilege of going on the site visit, you saw an organization whose reach into the community has been just breathtaking. I mean, they are both sort of the community and contributing to community. I think they have found this incredible balance of what it means to both have your own identity as an organization and as an arts and cultural force, but also to be deeply reflective of the norms and the values and the ways of behaving that are characteristic of communities. So we have in these three folks sort of three of the different pieces that I think have made Philadelphia such an extraordinary story. Laura was reminding me outside that it's tempting to get sort of sucked into the extraordinary progress and transformation that has been Philadelphia over these last couple of years. And we should all be careful not to lose sight that in many ways it's emblematic of so much of what's going on in America. That there is sort of a sense of divergence of trajectory among different elements of the population, and that gets played out every day in the neighborhoods of Philadelphia. And so I suspect we'll have a chance to talk about that. So the question I have for Mayor Nutter is...
Oh, wow. That's my... Could do like a whole show. Turn that down.
I was told that she was forceful. I had no idea. But I'm trying to think, what can we explore that we wouldn't want to do in his presence? I mean, how is he doing?
You take this one.
I think the evidence shows that he's doing pretty great. And I think one of the things that we're really focused on is what happens after him. You know, Sean and I were talking earlier. Sean McCaney, who many of you know, leads the Creative Communities team at the William Penn Foundation, and I were talking earlier and have been talking for many months now about the mayor's focus on greening Philadelphia and his commitment to the arts and to public space, and then about the intersection of those things in our own work, and how we make sure that we're protecting those gains for the city. And so this notion of mayoral transition is something that we're incredibly focused on and have had some conversations with him about. I think he's being very thoughtful about it. But we always try to remind ourselves that as great as he's been, many of the things that we work on preceded him and have great potential for continuing on if we are thoughtful about them in the right way. So many of you were at Fringe Arts last night on the Central Delaware. I heard it was a great time. That's an area that has been in the midst of change for quite some time. Many of us feel like it's kind of an overnight success because we're getting to experience a lot of the fruits of that work right now. And the mayor has been a huge contributor to that effort. But Sean always reminds me that that planning effort spanned many years before the mayor came into office, and there was real risk then that it would not be taken up by Mayor Nutter or whoever is going to be the mayor at that time. And so the foundation and the nonprofits that worked on that plan worked very hard to make sure that that there was a constituency, that there were customers, that there was demand for those amenities on the Delaware. And what happened was that the community really took hold of that and really owned it and really advocated for public access. And it's very difficult for a new mayor when he or she, in this case he, shows up at an event with 4,000 citizens who are clamoring for the plan that's just been created, that they've been engaged in creating, to then say, I'm not interested in doing that. So I think he's been terrific, and you know, we're sort of holding on to the edges of our seats and sort of holding our breaths a little bit to see, will this work continue? And yet we know from history that if we pay attention and if we do this right, we have a real chance to continue incredible work that's being done now. We also know that if we don't think about it and don't do it well, that we have a real chance of getting it wrong. So we're incredibly focused on that. I think it's a real tribute to him that we're focused on that. He's been effective. If he hadn't been, we wouldn't be so concerned.
You know, Aviva, I was talking to a couple of folks from Minneapolis. I spent my first part of my career in Minneapolis, and a couple of folks were talking about how the arts community in Minneapolis has sort of remained remarkably constant through these transitions. But it strikes me that in some ways, nonprofits almost have to work that way. I mean, and I'd be curious to know the extent to which you feel like a particular administration, whether it's Mayor Nutter's or anyone else's, is actually really that important to what you do.
I don't know that it's the particular administration, but I do know, or I suspect, that the leader, whoever is coming in to lead, that their power is probably greater than the projects that they're going to pursue, or continuing projects that, you know, had existed before. I think that what would be helpful for us, knowing that most of the people in the administration or the people that are supporting the administration stay for 10, 20, 30, 80 years, is that they be inspiring creativity in all of those people, that they actually make that a priority, that the people that are working for them and with them not feel that they are bound somehow by the bureaucracy and the system. I can't tell you, I mean, it's an ongoing joke that we're working on city time. I mean, people are just like, can't do anything about it. It's a city. It takes this long. We can't accept those answers. And I think that anyone who works, you know, in communities as I do, and the amazing people I work with do, most of our job is actually to get around those systems and to get then around those people, when our work should be to be merging with them, working well with them. And if we feel like we can make change, they should feel like they can make change, and that should come down from the very, very highest level. So I want to see somebody that comes into office, and I think my community wants to see somebody that comes into office that isn't really concerned whether we're going to continue investing in building Center City, or whether we believe that creative placemaking has anything to do with, you know, developing open spaces or painting murals, but rather how are we going to empower all these people that work for the city to think that they can challenge ideas, make change, work with communities, take time out of their day and visit the communities. Those are the things.
Well, so you may have just answered that, but if you spread out a spectrum where there wasn't that much creativity at one end and there was an enormous amount of creativity at another end, since he's not here, where would you place them?
Where would I place?
Where would you place this administration? Do you have the sense that there has been some incremental or dramatic sort of uptick in the level of creativity and supportive work that these departments are offering?
I would say that creative solutions that are going to impact the social inequity that exists are few and far between right now. And it's not a matter of looking at the individuals in the administration. I think it's a philosophy overall. So I guess as far as I'll go with that.
I'm not going to quite let you off the hook yet.
Oh, God.
So what would you say to the new mayor, saying, you know, the previous administration has done what it could.
Yeah.
It's done some important work, and it's provided some continuity for things we care about. But here are three very specific things that we'd like to see you guys do.
Okay. Well, I'll start with this. So we're here to talk about creative placemaking, right? I think that our city has a difficult time discerning between what is creative placemaking and what is, you know, developing centers for the arts and public art, and what is truly creative placemaking. I think we've invested a lot of money into projects that beautify but are not responsive, trickle down neighborhoods. We're very proud that we're a city of neighborhoods, and yet the investment into these creative placemaking projects, or so-called creative placemaking projects, do not trickle down to the actual people of these neighborhoods at all. And I would just say that and I'm sorry, that's also not to say that there is not a place for that work. I think there is a huge place for that work. It is just not, we know how to do that work. I think we can always be better and better at it, but we know how to do it. We do not know how to do the work of solving the deep poverty that exists in Philadelphia through art. But it's really fun, and it's what we should be exploring, and I'm not sure that looking at a lot of what we hear about in terms of, you know, even Mayor Nutter as he's walking out of office, is who's going to be the next mayor that's going to pick up investing in developing Center City as an arts and culture, you know, haven. I personally, I have not heard anybody in my community, which by the way is North Central Philadelphia, so just like above Temple. I haven't heard anybody concerned with that. I don't think that they're interested in what we're going to be doing for Center City in terms of arts.
I mean, I think it comes back to this, this point that you started with that we were talking about outside. I mean, I think tremendous momentum has been created, and the question is, where are we going to go with that, right? Are we going to continue to capitalize on the downtown core? Or are we going to try to carry that momentum out into other pockets of the city? I mean, it's very hard to swallow the fact that we are the poorest of the large cities in the country. You know, we've got to address that. But we're in, I think, a better position now to be able to do that. At least I hope we are. And I hope that what we can do is not, it comes back to this notion of we can't get complacent. We can't look at this as only a unidirectional trajectory. How can we make that about much more? So, you know, if you, we launched something with the Knight Foundation I guess about a month or two ago, around public space, and it was really a response to this notion of there's been, and our foundation has put quite a bit of money into the downtown core, so it's not, you know, so we're part of that conversation. But how do we make sure that those amenities are accessible to all Philadelphians, and that neighborhoods that surround the downtown core have them as well?
Right, but is it accessibility, though, or is it the need coming from the people themselves? I mean, I think that a lot of the work is, and honestly, and I'm somebody that I like to go and I have access to, and I like to enjoy these things. I think, perfect time.
Quick, hurry.
Yeah, so I think that it's how are we getting to the questions within communities and in between communities and the city, how are we getting to the right questions that deliver whatever we're going to build next or whatever we're going to do next. And I think those conversations exist primarily at a high level and in isolation. And the work that we need to do is actually in, you know, bringing in creative people who happen to be artists oftentimes in facilitating those dialogues, creating, you know, finding out what the question is in the first place. What do we need to know? How can we find out creatively? How can the creative process start there? How can that be the creative placemaking project itself, is going out and finding those answers, you know? I don't, you know, by any means, I don't think that's easy. It's the work that we actually really enjoy doing at the Village. It's hard to measure. It's hard to see the other end of. And I think just Jamie mentioned in his opening speech how he drew this, you know, chart with lots of cells, and I like that because I'm a designer.
Hello, Mayor.
And how you doing? You know, he mentioned that we need to include arts and culture in all of these different sectors and all these areas. And I completely agree, but I feel like arts and culture, or creative thinking, we should say, should be the foundation of that work. It shouldn't just, it should be a thread also that brings them all together. And I think that the role is not in the output being a creative, a piece or an artwork. It's that creative people can inspire people in that area that don't consider themselves to be artists or creative people to be creative about how they're thinking about their work. And we have to change systems. And in order to change systems, we have to be thinking creatively about that. So well, I think we've moved the needle, we've done a lot, and I think that we're really happy to not be looked at as sort of downtrodden and kind of confused as a city. I think now we have to pick it up, and we have to actually be doing really interesting, hard, innovative work to make good on that, you know, on that expectation or that perception shift. Welcome, Mayor Nutter.
Mic's off? Did I turn it off? I didn't mean to. Okay. Is that better?
There you go.
Okay. I think I turned it off when I moved it.
So, Mayor, I will send you all the nice comments I made about you before you came in.
Could you please repeat them?
No. No, I had to write them down. It was not a natural act. But I actually did point out that from the perspective of someone who spent 4 years in City Hall, I worked for Don Fraser when he was the mayor of Minneapolis.
Sure.
And watched someone who I thought at that point in time embodied excellence in municipal service. Rarely have I seen a mayor with the kind of integrity and decency and effectiveness that we've seen here in Philadelphia. So thank you. And
thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you.
But we then asked Laura and Aviva to tell us how you're doing, and there was more mixed.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's stick with the first part. Yeah. No, I understand, and I think I have a pretty decent understanding of why.
No, I'm teasing. They were. I think where we began was sort of talking about issues of transition and how you get into the water system of a place.
Yeah.
Some of the values and some of the issues. And Laura talked a little bit about the importance of civic engagement in making sure that things that people feel strongly about continue and are a political imperative for whatever administration might come. And Aviva, I think, made a more fundamental point that was sort of more fundamentally about the nature of community identity, community voice, community values, and that is that there needs to be, and pardon me, I'm not doing justice to this, sort of an infusion in sort of all dimensions of civic life and in a civic dialogue of creativity and of sort of the embrace of the kinds of values and approaches to problem solving and other work that artists can bring. So in some ways we've sort of set the table outside of City Hall to sort of say that the sectors in many ways sort of need to come together and do their part. And so if you wouldn't mind, you're welcome to start wherever you would like, but I think it would be fascinating to just hear your riff on the extent to which you believe during your administration issues of arts and culture and creative placemaking have become a value of the administration, and if not, why, and if so, how?
Sure. So thank you, and certainly Aviva and Laura, and all of you, and I apologize for being late. Our Living Flame Memorial recognizing fallen police officers and firefighters was earlier today, and as you all know, we lost two great members of our force. Lieutenant Joyce Craig was the first female firefighter to die in the line of duty here in the city's history, and now Sergeant Robert Wilson, a police officer who was killed in a robbery while trying to buy a video game for his son. So their names are added to the memorial, and please keep them and all of our public servants in your prayers. Yesterday, one of our streets department workers was electrocuted. He's in the hospital and trying to make his way back. So please think about him as well. It could have been just an incredible tragedy, but he is trying to recover. He's fighting back. You know, it's fairly well known now that I have not really 1 ounce of any kind of artistic capacity, capability. I still draw stick people. I mean, it's pretty sad. But I grew up in a household that there was always music in my house. My father really, really enjoyed music. As a matter of fact, I was just listening to one of his favorite artists, Frank Sinatra, in the car. I played the piano when I was a kid. Took lessons in grade school and continued in high school. Probably one of the worst things I did not continue to do was to stick with that. But over the years, and my mentor, my political mentor, was the late Councilman at Large, John Anderson, who really helped me to much better understand. He was a great champion of the arts here in Philadelphia, and I saw what he did in his work, and I came to better understand what government can do in that regard. I went to a lot of events with him and just really saw that impact. Fast forward, as a member of City Council, actively engaged in any number of art and culture events. But it really hit home when there was an Office of Arts and Culture in the city, I guess in the early 2000s or so, and then it was disbanded. I had pledged as a candidate for mayor that I would restore it, which we did. And Helen was here yesterday, Office of Arts, Culture, and the Creative Economy. It only exists by executive order. I would desperately appeal to this community to get the necessary legislation introduced and passed to make that office permanent with a permanent executive director. We've seen recent efforts. The Sustainability Office was made permanent. I created that by executive order, and members of City Council took action, and the public did as well. The Office of LGBT Affairs is hopefully about to be made permanent. That's a ballot question that hopefully will be on the November ballot. There's no reason in the world that we should not have a permanent Office of Arts, Culture, and the Creative Economy here in the city of Philadelphia. But only City Council can do that and make it permanent. And I would appeal to the arts and culture community to really call on council to do this. There are a number of members who are interested, but there's something going on, and maybe you all can kind of figure it out a little better than me. The art and culture sector is the fourth largest in the economy of the city of Philadelphia. Somewhere between 40 and 50,000 jobs are connected to art and culture. I love our sports teams, and you know this is the craziest sports town in the United States of America. It's the best sports town in the United States of America. But if you go down the list of from large to small, small to large, the arts and culture world, more people go to arts and culture venues here in the city than all the folks who go to ball games for our sports teams. So it is a significant component. Where's some snap? It's a significant component of the economy of the city, and it creates a liveliness and an openness of opportunity. So you know that we have people who have moved to Philadelphia from, you know, as I like to call them, our suburb to the north, New York City, who find it easier actually to break into the arts and culture scene in Philadelphia than New York City. Some live in Philly and work in New York and make that commute. I think the explosive growth of the millennial population here in the city, again through arts and culture and the creative economy, provides new opportunity for folks in a variety of areas, but also that's on the adult side. But I was at Roxborough High School yesterday, and they have an academy model there. So I was working with students in cinematography as well as in web design. Those are all jobs. Those are really good-paying jobs. And so to the extent that we support those activities in our schools, and that every school is a standard part of the curriculum, just like science, just like English, just like geography or world history, every school should have an art teacher. Every school should have a music teacher. Every school should have those resources, not as nice things to have. Every study has shown that young people who are engaged in those activities are actually better students, learn in different ways, often keeping their attention, because all students are very different and their capacities are different. But it should be something that young people are exposed to. And so how we make this real is by, first and foremost, the mayor has to talk about these things all the time, every day, in every possible way, to different audiences, to demonstrate, again, the significance and importance. We need to fund these things. So let me, just kind of deal with, I'm sure, the big elephant in the room. on that one. Our funding has been, I'd say, slightly erratic from time to time, and certainly arts and culture took a hit, like everybody else took a hit, through the recession. We increased the cultural fund last year through a joint agreement between our administration and City Council, and I know many folks feel that we have subsequently cut the cultural fund. That is not exactly true, but I can appreciate that you might feel that way. The agreement last year was for a one-year infusion of additional dollars to the cultural fund. That was the agreement. If we want to talk about a permanent increase, that's a different conversation, and we need to have that between ourselves and City Council. When we budget, you know that we're under the PICA Act, so for me, every dollar is actually $5 because we have to show it through the entire 5-year plan. So if we're going to increase it, I think we did $1.3 million additional last year. So, I mean, you'll do the math. It's about $6.5 million in the 5-year plan. Every department and agency wants more money and can make a great case for why they should have it. Putting all of that aside, because those are all details back home in the crazy building where I work. What I'm most concerned about is the damage wrought by the recession on many of our smaller artistic organizations, and that many of them are struggling financially, operating on very, very thin margins, could potentially go out of business, and that we really need to focus on where are there synergies and opportunities for collaboration or merger to strengthen two organizations that left on their own, neither may be able to survive, but together could possibly be strengthened. And that's just a conversation that we need to have here in the city. Some of our larger organizations will always have some ability or capacity to raise the dollars that they need to raise. They have big patrons. They have great foundation support and track records. But I am very, very worried about many of our smaller organizations, and especially those that may particularly cater to communities of color and what their future may be. I do really think that we're at a crossroads in our art and culture community. And lastly, I guess maybe one of my biggest disappointments in terms of what we've done or not done, you know, there have been at least 2 past efforts at trying to secure a more stable and dedicated funding stream for arts and culture here in Philadelphia. And often the model, the Allegheny County model, which is a more regional approach, has been discussed. I've had some thoughts and ideas about that. Couldn't exactly put that one forward in the midst of the recession and just kind of didn't get it done. But I don't think that we should give up on that kind of effort. There's so many people in the suburbs who come to programs and events and activities in the city. And I think many Philadelphians actually go to some things in the suburbs from time to time. And so trying to figure out how do we get in place a stable, secure, recurring, and at least for inflationary purposes, some growth over time, that these dollars would go to arts and culture because that's what we value. This is a great arts and culture town. There's no question about it. We have more outdoor public art than any other major city in the United States of America. We've got 4,000 plus murals all over the city. People come from around the world to see some of the things that are going on here in the city. And for me, it really is about stabilizing the financial structure, working with those that are struggling, and getting a stable and secure funding source to really drive that agenda. And I guess not last, but last, having a permanent office of arts, culture, and the creative economy in the city government. The work must continue. So that's what I think.
You know, in a minute, I think what I'd love to do is get folks from the audience into the conversation. So if you could, let me sort of push at these folks one more time, but if you could sort of begin to collect your thoughts, that would be great. You know, before the mayor arrived, we talked a little bit about trying to understand how to infuse into all sort of elements of civic life sort of a creative placemaking way of thinking about life. And we talked a little bit about this, but I'm just wondering, maybe I'll give Mayor one more shot at this. The sense of arts and culture sort of increasingly being part of the way an engineer thinks about her work, or the way a road manager thinks about his work, or whatever it might be. At some level, I think it seems like a stretch, but at another level, it's so fundamental. That trying to figure out more creative ways of taking problems apart, putting them back together, drawing community in both the framing of the question and perhaps the framing of the solution. Do you have a sense that that is something that is at all resonant in your administrative structure?
Well, I'd like to think it is. I mean, again, Philadelphia was the leader in the Percent for Art program, right, across the country. 50-plus years now of the program. I mean, I was just at a dedication for a piece of art at the SWAT bomb squad building. But, there it is. And, and there's a big plaque and explains, what it is. And so, I mean, even for that kind of facility, I mean, it's brand new, it's required, and so, and police officers are there and they're talking about it, and so, I mean, I just think that art is a critical component of what all of us do. I mean, it is about design, it is about function, it's about how things look, and it's, again, I couldn't design anything, but I know, as the judge once said in a different kind of way, I mean, but I know what I like when I see it, right? So, or that it's appealing. And I think whether it's a police bomb squad unit or one of our rec centers, or, we're going to have a new, so where are we? We're 36th Street. 10 blocks up the street, we're going to have a new police headquarters, in probably a year and a half. I would expect there will be some great public art associated with that. So, for me, art and culture in an administration, I think of it in the context of what we've tried to do with sustainability and our Greenworks Philadelphia plan. So every department and agency has some level of responsibility for the goals of that particular work and initiative. And I think we've tried to give that same sense to art and culture. So, we have artists working with us today who have a previous criminal record. And they work with Jane on the restorative justice project. So folks who were in prison did whatever it is they did. Some are still in, and lifers at greater risk, but are creating things of beauty that people get to see out in the street, or were incarcerated and are now, doing something very, very positive. Pay their debt to society, and this opportunity is created for them. And so that's the arts community, but that's also the criminal justice community, and that's a person who more than likely is not going back to jail because they're working, because they can see the outcome of their talent that for a while had been locked up and is now on full exposure for people here in the city. And so I think those kinds of collaborations are very important.
Laura, Aviva, any reactions before we open it up?
A lot of smiling.
Yeah.
Yeah, be careful of that smile, by the way.
Yeah, I understand.
A lot to take in.
I understand.
Well, I like what you said. I mean, I totally, I think that, I think it is demonstrated, and certainly, we are really happy that we have designated money towards arts and culture in Philadelphia, and particularly as it applies to the education of young people. And your administration has been very supportive and responsive to that.
Sure.
And I also would like to see that be a permanent order. But I think that it is, again, and maybe this was before you came in, I think it's really important that we distinguish between, we are here today, we're talking about creative placemaking. We're not necessarily talking about public art as just public art, and we're not talking even really just about building buildings or more institutions that house art. It's really about using creativity and using an artistic approach
Right.
to problem solving. And we were saying that, Philadelphia is, kind of ground zero for a slew of problems, that, social inequities. And I'm interested in how we can make sure that our government and our largest foundations actually, inspire in all the people that are working within those systems a thought that we can all imagine a better future where those things don't exist, that we probably can't be using the same systems and the same processes that we've been using to get to a solution there,
Yeah.
and that we may not even know exactly what the problem is, and that we have to do better work to find that out, and a creative approach is what's necessary. And that's not about being a painter, and it's not about being a musician. It's about having a creative mind.
Right.
And I think you said in the beginning that you were an artist, and I've heard a lot of people say that, actually, in this convention. And that's not important. It's that you have the ability to think creatively and hope, through that strategic thinking.
I guess the one thing, so thank you. I'm going to start calling myself an artist.
You should.
But, I guess, not so much in response to what you said, but in that context, then I think we have to educate children and adults. And if I have some level of creativity to me, it's because I've been a beneficiary of a great education that allows me to think, that allows me to problem solve and to try to figure some things out because I've had that benefit. And I think the deficiency here is that a whole lot of children and many of our adults have not had that opportunity. I think it is a little tougher to problem solve or be creative if you struggle to read, if you've not been exposed to certain things. And so, as I often say, if you stay out in the elements too long, right, you will die from exposure. The challenge here in Philadelphia is that many of our children die from a lack of exposure. They pretty much know the 4 blocks around their house. They don't know what it's like to be on a college campus. They've not been whether to the Art Museum or the Bushfire Theater on 52nd Street. They can't imagine something bigger, better, different, because they've not been exposed to bigger, better, different in ways that help them to think about things in a very, very different way. And I think that lack of exposure is damaging, is limiting, and stunts the creative mind and the ability to strategically figure out, kind of what you want to do next and problem solve.
So the questions that we want to explore, actually, though, because I suspect that might be true, and it makes me sad that a lot of kids, that are in the neighborhood where I work and have been for the past 5 years, actually haven't been to South Street or, haven't been to a museum in Philadelphia. That makes me personally sad. But I think that I'm really curious, and I like to use art to find out if that is sort of the biggest problem right now. If their, exposure to other areas or exposure to art is, the biggest challenge. Or, if actually, and you mentioned, somebody with, who's reentering society or somebody with a criminal record, if painting a mural and getting a job painting a mural actually does, mean that they won't recidivate. Like, I want to explore those things. And I think that's where particularly the Village is interested in investing all of its arts money, is actually in the research and the experimentation in projects that lead us to those answers. Then we can build things, and then we can execute. So that our best artworks are actually in the investigation of those things and in creating new, systems and new processes that help us get to even the next question and the next question.
Laura, you
So,
want to?
yeah, I think the other thing that's been kind of in the background in this, but I think where the creative placemaking movement and efforts have been really strong is in resident engagement, right? So it is in part about creative people and creative thinking, but a big part of why that works is because creative people, I think, are really strong in engaging residents in communities. And, you know, as we think about some of the other challenges that we're seeking to solve, it's often the residents who have a sense of what could create greater possibility. And so it's through the combination of exposure and hope and a chance to voice those needs, those interests, what they want in a park, in a mural. I mean, that's one of the things that makes the Mural Arts program so wonderful, is that there is a very strong community engagement process in defining what goes on a wall in their community. And so it's not just about the piece of art, it's about the process of getting there. And so I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that, because I think that's in part where this movement, this notion of creative placemaking has been strong, and we haven't really talked about residents yet in this conversation.
Why don't we take a question? I suspect we may quickly get into that space.
Excuse me.
No questions. Here's one. Here's two. Why don't you maybe just say who you are so the folks know.
Hi, my name is Sophie Constantino, and I'm from San Francisco. And I don't want to push back because I feel like you've done this a little bit already, but I want to go back and I want to talk to my mayor, right? My mayor has no idea, as a mayor of a big metropolitan area, what creative placemaking is. So how, and I sort of sat there and watched that conversation, and I thought, oh, you guys did better than I will, because it's a really hard thing to explain, what it is to connect the dots between, government and nonprofits and creativity and civic engagement and community engagement and resident engagement in these sectors that should talk to each other. When I know that the government, I know that the Department of the Environment is not talking to the housing, is not, so if I'm the conduit as an artist, what does that mean, and how do I get there so that people think differently about that communication?
Well, let me say this. So you're in San Francisco. So I know Mayor Lee well.
And we'll talk to him immediately after this.
You don't need to hear from me. But let me just say, so I know him in a way. He is particularly focused in areas of innovation, computer science, technology. He is all over that, and is actually one of the leaders in that particular area in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, of which I'm a member and former president. So, let me be the first to say that, whether you think he can engage in that kind of conversation, and I'm really only half at the most in this conversation. Some of these things are just beyond many of us for what we do for a living, right? We kind of go back to, what is this job? I pick up trash and fill potholes for a living, right? I try to make sure when someone calls 911 that an officer or a firefighter shows up and that they get to go home at their tour of duty. I'm asking a business person to invest in the city or expand their business or come to Philadelphia. And so what I think the main thing I want to communicate to you is, and this is what I say to other elected officials, especially candidates, you are no smarter on Wednesday than you were on Monday. You just had a better Tuesday than everybody else who was running. We still have a lot of things to learn. I know what I know. I know the things that I'm good at. I know what I don't know. And I will never really become an expert in this area. What I know is that it's important. Try to hire the best people that you can. Try to talk to them as much as you can. I'll pick up a little bit by osmosis, enough to carry a 5-minute conversation. But the focus and the effort, is going to be with someone who really has much more expertise in that area. My job is to support it and make it happen. Whether I completely, fully understand it or not is almost immaterial. What's really important is that I know it's important and try to make it happen and support it get out of the way and let people who really know what they're doing do their thing. But just get out of the way. You just can't get invited to every party, you know?
Hello, amazing, distinguished panel. Is that on?
I don't know.
Is this on?
There
yes,
you go.
That sounds.
Yeah.
Hello, amazing, distinguished panel.
Hello.
I'm Kalima Rose with PolicyLink in Oakland, California.
Yeah.
Angela sends her
Angela,
regards
sure.
to Mayor Nutter.
Absolutely.
So, you know, our mission in life is to try to deliver on equity in society. And we try to do it in all of the sectors that you represent. We try to get government to use all of its investments to deliver on more equity. We try to work with advocates who are bringing it from the community and with philanthropy. And so I'm just wondering if we got to see lots of projects in Philadelphia yesterday, and some of them seemed like they were making great progress in equity, and others seemed that they didn't have much of a view on it. And I'm just wondering if you can comment. We have been interviewing cities, creative cultural leaders, and philanthropy on what the policy underpinnings of creative placemaking can be that deliver on equity. And I'm wondering if you can comment from a Philadelphia perspective in the things that you think make a structural difference in delivering for communities of color and low-income communities through creative placemaking, and how we could build a new WPA that rebuilt the infrastructure of our cities, gave everyone work, and delivered beautiful places that reflected the communities they're in.
Much of which is still around today. You want to maybe
Yeah,
set
I mean,
a
I think
context?
you know, it's unfortunate, but it requires an extremely high degree of intentionality. And policies and elected officials and civic leaders to really be focused on the issue of equity and deciding that a project should be about equity. But I think what underlies all of that is a community commitment to it, and that, I think, gets built much more organically. So, you know, I talked on Friday night about Spruce Street Harbor Park, which was, you know, a great success by many measures. But I think one of the greatest successes was not just about the physical space, but about the interactions that happened in that place, right? So we saw people from all different parts of the city coming to Spruce Street Harbor Park. They were attracted because of the amenities and the color and the games and the food and the beer, the pop-up performances. That's what brought them there. But the space was set up in a way that allowed for interaction, and I think we have to be really mindful that that is such a key component of this. Because at the end of the day, if we as citizens don't demonstrate that we believe in the value of that, we won't get to the policies that are required to achieve equity. And I think that's true for this kind of work. I think that's true for work in education, and we have to demand it.
And that might be a little bit of an example to back to you. So, you know, my team comes to me and they tell me about this concept. Now, I've been on the Delaware waterfront, you know, 1 billion times, and part of the challenge down there is, had been in the past, why would I go down there? There's nothing there. So they came to me to tell me about this idea. It's Delaware River Waterfront Development Corporation. And they started trying to explain it to me. And, you know, I just kind of wasn't totally getting it. I mean, it's like, what? And hammocks and lights and stuff and so I'm sitting there saying, okay, here's the deal. I don't completely understand this. It sounds really cool. Just go do it. Just go do it. And so when we went down and opened it, I mean, I was astounded at how great it was. So again, you don't have to be all in everything. And then I got pissed. So I went to the opening, busy summer, blah, blah, blah. And then I got like a note in August. Because I think it was supposed to end like September 1st.
Labor Day.
Right. And they said, well, Spruce Street Harbor Park is going away. And I said, well, why? It's like it's still summer. I mean, you know, September. He said, no, it was only scheduled to be here until Labor Day. I said, well, I've only been there like once. So you have to keep it open for another month so that I can go. So Tom Cochran said, Mayor, are you serious? I said, yeah, you have to find the money. I've only been there once, and I want to go back to Spruce Tree Harbor Park, so you have to keep it open another month. And they did.
I think, too, you
Some of
know,
the stuff you can do when you're mayor, right?
you know, coming back to the resident piece, you know, there's some folks in the room who are working on a project in the Parkside Edge area of Fairmount Park, so one of the highest poverty communities in our city. There's a big, vast, empty lawn that looks pretty when it's mowed, but not much happens there. There is nothing there. And it would be very easy, relatively easy, to come in and say, oh, let's design something that looks good, that all the designers would say makes sense, and never engage anyone in the community in the design of that. That would be a pretty easy thing to do. But instead, the folks who are working on that and funding that have said this should be a community amenity, and have gone through a very intentional process of engaging the community in doing it. Again, that doesn't just happen. I think we have to be intentional about it. And so there's kind of small p policy, right? We have policies about how we, you know, how we as funders require that, how nonprofits who are working on these issues deliver on that, and spark all of that. And then those kinds of things, I think, lead to big P policy, to put structures in place that try to institutionalize some of that behavior.
So I think for the work that we're doing right now, one of the most important things is that the challenge, we kind of loosely are using community design principles. So in other words, the need is coming from the community itself. That's just has to. So it's not really up to us to decide whether, you know, there's a big open space that looks prettier when it's mowed or not. It's, does that really matter to them at all? Because they could really not care whether it looks pretty or not, and whether there's trash in it. They might care more about the fact that they don't have a, you know, grocery store or a, you know, high school within walking distance or something like that. So the need has to come from the community. And then we have to make sure that as we're bringing in creative people to sort of intervene and figuring out what the solution might be, that they're working from go, side by side, with people from the community. We call them neighborhood artists. They actually may have no artistic background whatsoever, but because we consider them to be creative, we call them artists. They call themselves that. And really that whatever the solution that's coming out of these projects is another resource. So it's like another asset for the community, something maybe that's, you know, rooted in infrastructure, something then that can be built on top of, that we can have this, you know, stacking of functions in all of the arts, you know, related solutions that we create. And so for us, I mean, that's the measure of success and impact in work like this. And I think that if we can make sure that the work that we're doing as a city or as a whole, you know, always sort of looks to the community to not build consensus, like to not just come in and go, we saw this blank wall and we want to put a mural on it, let's all talk about what the mural should be. I mean, that's not, you know, we don't want to, it's also really, I just want to point out that that's really hard to do. People ask us to do that with them a lot, and I don't really want to spend my time figuring out how to get people to agree. I want to figure out how to get people to the table to figure out what they want and need, which means that you actually also have to inspire some sort of sense of belonging to a space first, so that they can even imagine that they might be talking for a reason that will deliver action. Anyway, so I lose my train of thought so quickly these days. Sorry, I'm pregnant. But,
oh, really?
But, yeah, I know.
Really?
Can't tell it all, right?
Yeah, no.
So I don't know a lot about policy, and I don't know a lot about how policy will, in the end, actually influence, you know, great change in, you know, micro communities. I hope that it can and will, and I was really interested in the presentation earlier and what you guys do. But that's our process. I mean, that's what we use to measure, and it's a moving target, and it's hard to sell to people. I can imagine if that project was like, you know, blew your mind a little bit. You know, what I'm talking about is actually really, it's a strange thing to embrace. And luckily, ArtPlace was into it. So, you know.
Jamie has given me the go-ahead to take one or two more questions, and then I think we have to let all of you go. Are there additional questions, or one way over? Yes, sir.
Hi. There's something. My name is Mark Valdez from Los Angeles. Something that sticks out to me is that we're talking about democracy, right? About inclusion in the arts, like who gets to make art, and how do we make this, you know, what you were talking about is like how do you get people at the table so that they can talk about it? And there's a connection here between access and democracy and whose voice gets to determine, you know, something that for a long time has been viewed as elitist or that you don't belong, that doesn't belong to you. So much of this work is about creating the space so that so you can own it, right? So that you can bring your voice to it. And having a mayor here, like there's a direct connection around democracy and voting and who feels like this is their city and not your city. And I'm wondering if there's something like how we can help, like we're learning something here, and how do we scale it up to belonging in the city? And who is it? The mayor's decision? Is it our decision? Is it, you know, the people that we work with? I don't know if I'm making a point, but there seems to be a parallel there.
I understand. I'm pretty sure I understand. Please give Mayor Garcetti my best out there. For the Philadelphians, so for 14 and a half years I represented the 4th Council District in City Council. 60% of the Fairmount Park System, which is one of the largest municipally owned park systems in the country, is here in Philadelphia. 60% of that system is in the district I represent. I'm born and raised here. I've lived here all my life, never lived anywhere else. I grew up in our parks, played in them as a kid and an adult. I'd like to think that I'm respectful of the environment. Well, I mean, Aviva's given me license to say I'm an artist. Maybe I could call myself an environmentalist. I don't know. But, I mean, I haven't hugged many trees or anything. But, you know, you learn things. I say all that to say that 8 years ago, when I ran for mayor, probably the most organized group of the various groups were the folks in the sustainability world. And they made sustainability a major issue in the mayor's race. And while I had a little bit of a track record there, I mean, I had to really, you know, strengthen myself in that particular regard. And I can assure you that by the end of the campaign, every candidate was the sustainability candidate. Every candidate was green. Every candidate had a policy. Every candidate loved the environment. And the whole point of that is the community made this an issue for us. And it was at your own peril if you did not understand some fundamental concepts and make some commitments. So I said, at the first inauguration, that we were going to make Philadelphia the #1 green city in the United States of America. Pretty bold. It's even bolder when you consider we didn't even have a plan. Because, well, it was the first day, so, you know. But we did it a year later. And we have driven that because it was important to people here, it was important to me as the mayor, and the commitments that I made. And so whether it's Mayor Garcetti or Mayor Lee or a bunch of mayors, A, you need to have the mayor involved. And C, you want to communicate with the mayor in such a way that he or she can understand why is this important? What is it leading to? So it's not green for the sake of green. It's green for the sake of jobs. It's green for the sake of the environment. It's green for the sake of sustainability. It's green for the sake of, you know, I can give you half a dozen more things. It's not art for the sake of pretty sounds or art for the sake of, you know, dashing lines on a canvas. It's what it does for the community. And so I would strongly encourage you, and next week I'll get all these calls from the mayors. Why did you tell them that? Talk to them. Explain why this is, and help them to understand. Again, we are not geniuses. We were fortunate on a particular election day. Now you have all this responsibility. If you can lay out a path, this is what it's about, this is what it will do, this is how it fits into your larger overall agenda, or what it can transform our city into, you will more than likely be successful. And then you want that person talking about that and all the other things that we have to talk about. But there are some consistent things that I talk about on virtually a daily basis. I give a half a dozen speeches at least a day. Somewhere in any one of them, I'm going to talk about education, I'm going to talk about public safety, I'm going to talk about jobs and sustainability, and I'm going to talk about ethics. And I will figure out a way for whoever the audience is to talk about those things because they're important. Because I want everyone in the city to know these are the important things. In addition to picking up trash, in addition to filling potholes, in addition to moving snow, in addition to warning you about hurricanes and earthquakes and all the other madness that goes on, in a big city. But there are some fundamental tenets that you have to have, pillars of accountability and responsibility that have to drive your agenda on a daily basis. Otherwise, this is the most distracting job in the United States of America. Every day. So I have a schedule. I say to folks, the schedule is an estimate of what might happen today. Because then all the other stuff happens.
Yeah.
Right? And whether it's when our workers get electrocuted, whether it's a trash truck runs into somebody, somebody gets shot. I mean, none of that's on the schedule. Right? So there were times when it was probably a little hard for me to talk about, art and design and place-based strategies when I'm raising people's taxes, when our schools don't have enough money, when, whatever the next issue is. Because people would say, what in the hell is wrong with you? Our kids don't have books, and you're talking about, this over here. That makes no sense to us. So there's a timing aspect and a rhythm and a flow to all of these things. And you can't be over here when everybody else is focused on the thing over here. A, they won't hear you. B, it won't get covered. And C, they'll think there's something wrong with you. Right? So you pick your spot and your issues. But once you have it, stay on it. Right? So I didn't do all the things that I wanted to do when I wanted to do them, or invest as much as I would have liked in some areas. Because in this job, you don't get to do everything you want to do, even though you're the mayor. But you can drive an agenda. And if you rally people around those things, you can actually make some really serious and important stuff happen. You're more powerful than you realize as voters. And Laura's heard this speech a million times. The folks in the philanthropic world are tremendously more powerful, oftentimes, than they truly realize. They have resources, they have ideas, they have a focus, they have a commitment. You partner that with the mayor or the local government or whatever the case may be, and if the people say, this is what we want, then it is very dangerous for that elected official or the next one. So we're going through a transition. I mean, it's no big secret here in the city. It'd be very dangerous for the next person to try to undo some things that you all have said are critically important to the future of the city. You will do that at your own peril. You can get us to do a lot of different things that may not be our thing or was not the initial focus of our thing. And we have to adjust our agenda to the people that we work for, who are you. So.
I think that's actually a great place to draw to a close.
You got it.
And at the risk of being a little...
Gentleman over here who's really hurting himself.
Oh, he's really hurting himself. He's going to have to hurt himself offline. Can we have you come and talk to the panel afterward? I think we probably need to break.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Sure.
Can you guys stay and take a question from...
Yeah.
Okay. So I think for the rest of the folks, we probably need to bring it to a close. So can you all join me in thanking a pretty amazing...
Don't do that.
Headline.
Go off. I wanted to add my thanks to Rip for moderating what I think was a really great and important conversation. So please join me in thanking Rip as well. So we're about to send you all off to go lobby your own mayors at Mayor Nutter's insistence. So go off and do that. We heard it from Dennis Scholl. We heard it from Mayor Nutter. I think it's good advice. When Esther Robinson was speaking at the end of the session just before lunch, she talked sort of in defense of the interstitial moments and all sort of those wonderful moments that happen in between the sessions. And I was just thinking back over some of my favorite interstitial moments from the last 2 days. And whether it was sort of connecting with Bob from Modesto and hearing that the arts policy that he's been working on for 10 years was passed last night by City Council, which I thought was pretty fantastic. Congratulations. Whether it was getting one of these from our colleagues at YOLO Arts, which is my new favorite project for the moment, which is an artist-designed plate that a local chef designs a meal around that he or she sources from local farmers. And so YOLO would like us to become ArtPlate America. So I think that's pretty fantastic. I tweeted Diane Kaplan last night and said that when I was in the DOT breakout session yesterday, 15% of the attendees were from Alaska, and they were from 3 different cities in Alaska. So we had Homer, Anchorage, and Juneau represented, which I think is pretty awesome. And then there's a war on Twitter about whether our bumper sticker is going to be Shift Happens or Artists Are Different. So I think those are the 2 bumper stickers. And my favorite moment was when Millie Hawk Daniel said that I was right to get highlights. So that was sort of my favorite moment. The most important thing for some of you in the room is that any of you who are CDI finalists need to be in the university suite at 4 p.m. So any of you who are CDI finalists need to be in the university suite at 4 p.m. It's a tight turnover. Please do it because Liz is going to go through some important information about the site visits that you guys are going through. And so just to end, please join me in thanking once again William Penn and the Knight Foundation for hosting us. I think Nick from Fringe Arts, from Philly Fringe, is here somewhere, and I just want to thank him again for such an extraordinary party last night, which was awesome. I want to thank all of the artists who've taken their time to be with us and join us in the room today. So all of the artists, thank you very much for being with us. And then the very last thing is I just want to once again thank the extraordinary colleagues that we have at ArtPlace. So Liz and Ben, who are working on the CDI program, who are here somewhere in the room, maybe setting it up. Javier and Lila, who I think all of you know from the National Grant Program. Thank you both very much. Jamie Hand, who led the wonderful session this morning. Thank you very much, Jamie. And then most of all, please join me in thanking the 2 people who are responsible for everything that went right over the past 3 days, Prentice and Vesna, who really put everything together. So with that break, Roger, come on up and chat with the panel and Rip. Everyone else, go forth and prosper. CDI folks to university. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.